wine inflame them, and the harp and the viol, the tabret and pipe, and wine are in their feasts, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing the book of Isaiah. We're in chapter 5. I don't know why it says Isaiah 1 there. So we left off, what do we say, verse 11? Oh yes, woe to them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, that continue until night, till wine inflame them. It's a very obvious, kind of on the nose point, obviously. You start drinking early in the morning, and continue all night, woe to you. It's not a good position to be in. That's the true trap of alcoholism, is that people, they wake up with a hangover and then they try to fix it. And I guess if you drink again in the morning, it'll fix it. I don't know. I've never done that. I've never tried to fix a hangover with more booze. Maybe I have. I don't know. Once a long time ago. I don't know. It wasn't something I ever got in the habit of doing. Because obviously, if you've ever drank, you know that the drunkenness takes you out of your mind. It's kind of like the state of being you're in. You're stumbling, and it's not a particularly good place to be as a person drunk. As far as relaxing, if you're trying to go to sleep or something, I see the point of someone who might want to drink to relax, to go to sleep. But someone who starts drinking in the morning, it's just like there's nothing good can come of it. Early in the morning to drink. Now, I don't think there's anyone who actually rises to drink in the morning. Like, literally, they get up, like, to set their alarm so they can start drinking. But it's as if, honestly, I could see waking up with a headache, jumping up and running over to the liquor cabinet. Because this is the trap that alcoholics fall into, is they, and I know alcoholics can be a lot less than this, but they wake up in the morning, they start drinking, pretty soon they're drinking all day. And all day drinking is not good. It's not going to do you any good. And even, when I talk about drinking at night, even as I say that, remember, with conscience, be very careful. There's so many scriptures that warn about alcohol and how dangerous it is. And any other drug. But, in moderation, it may be acceptable, but, the thing is that there can be a trap with moderate. You can tell yourself, I'm going to do this moderately, and you can start off doing things moderately. But if it starts progressing into less moderate things, by the time it does, it may be too late for you to get off the train. You might find yourself trapped in a cycle of addiction. Now, obviously, drinking alcohol is a very obvious thing that is hurtful to people. But there are other ways in which this can be true in a spiritual sense, because there is this idea of spiritual drunkenness that comes up in Isaiah and other places. For example, in Revelation, the whore of Babylon is drunk with the wine of her fornication, with the output products of what she has done in worshiping the devil. She is drunken with that in a spiritual sense. In chapter 29 of Isaiah, it says, they stagger, but not with wine. They are drunk, but not with strong drink, because the Lord has poured upon you the spirit of deep sleep. In other places, he compares the religious leaders to being drunk, and that they, and meaning that it's like they're about as competent as drunkards at being religious leaders. They're staggering around and vomiting when they should be teaching and being filled with wisdom. And so, in a spiritual sense, the idea of drunkenness, outside of the actual physical thing, it's a state in which one becomes desensitized and has poor judgment, where you act as if you're drunk. Or maybe you could say, from God's perspective, you're behaving like you're drunk. Like you're swerving all over the road, like you're staggering back and forth from one sin to the next. I mean, out of your senses. And I mean a spiritual sense of being not properly grounded, but being filled with something else. You know, they say people get drunk on power. Or they can get drunk on love. Or we have the saying punch drunk. And obviously, why do we use those? They have no relation to alcohol abuse, do they? None. Except in a metaphorical sense. In a poetic sense, you could say someone could be drunk on love. Meaning, they're starting to make poor decisions and behave strangely. You know what I mean? Maybe they're drunk on love, so they don't notice that the person they're in love with is a horrible person. You know? It's very common. You know, people, they'll have a family member, they'll get involved with some person, and they think this person's horrible. And the whole family thinks they're horrible, but the person involved thinks they're wonderful, and everyone else can see it, but they can't. Because they're drunk on love, in a sense, you know. Drunk on power, you know, they start getting so filled with themselves of power, they start behaving in ways that show lack of judgment, and that seem as though they don't know what they're doing, like a drunk person trying to operate a heavy piece of machinery, you know. So is a person drunk on power trying to be a leader. In a spiritual sense, they also, you know, those are one. In a religious sense, religious leaders become drunken. They become desensitized and they exercise poor judgment. All the things you would, you know, associate with alcohol abuse, with an acute drunkard, an acute drunken incident. You can associate those things with what he would be saying about religious leaders, political leaders, general people. So we have all kinds of ways in which people become drunk with things. And they are similar to alcohol in that the person is behaving as if, one, they are not totally in control of themselves. Two, they show poor judgment, poor impulse control. There's all kinds of things that, you know, are stereotypical of when someone's drunk. That when they're not drunk, but for some other reason are behaving that way, something else has taken the place of the alcohol to muddle their thinking. Right? And so those are other ways, in a spiritual sense, people can be drunk. And I say this because, well, like I said, they be drunken but not with wine, they stagger but not with strong drink, it says in Isaiah. It's because there's a drunkenness, you know, even from, you know, it says in 29, you know, the Lord has poured upon you the spirit of stupefaction, the spirit of drunkenness. And we see in various places this theme of drunkenness crop up again and again. And so it has more of an application than just stay away from alcohol. That's good. That's good. Once you've got carnal righteousness, if you have a physical drunkenness problem, that is a priority. I used to say, oh, it's not as big a deal as being spiritually drunken, because I was drinking. And I would say, well, it's not as big a deal as spiritual drunkenness, you know. And that may or may not be true, depending on the case. But in the case of me, from my perspective, spiritual drunkenness is not important at all, especially if I'm not spiritually drunk. And the physical drunkenness is what really matters. So it's like, just because, you know, it's the trap of comparing yourself to other people instead of comparing yourself to the Lord or to what you were yesterday, which is probably the best comparison you can make. So, you know, comparison to God is like, well, I don't measure up, but that's my model. Comparison to other people, it's too easy to say, like, yeah, I'm better than you. But, you know, I want to look at myself yesterday and say, yeah, I'm better than me. And that's the most healthy way you could approach the idea of bettering yourself, is that not think of in terms of what other people are doing, but just in terms of your own life. How can you better yourself little by little in the ways that are pleasing to God? So it reminds me of sometimes it reminds me of like what some guy said about certain type of people with political point of view. He said, "Oh, you people with this particular point of view, what I admire about you is that you guys really believe in this stuff and you eat it for breakfast." He said, "I was like that. You eat it for your breakfast. It's like first thing, and again, you have it for breakfast. It's the same thing as this passage. They say like, oh, he loves sports. He has it for breakfast. Oh, he if you've ever heard that saying. If not, it's okay. But it is a saying we have in English. And what it means is someone is really into something, so much into it that they rise up in the morning and that's the first thing they do. And just like with drinking. They get up in the morning, they prepare their drink immediately. Because, in fact, they're getting up early because they're hungover in bed. I remember that. I remember I'd be in bed, miserable, and thinking, I don't want to get up because I'm miserable, but I better get up and get some aspirin or something in my head before my head explodes. And so also, they lay in bed and they're like, I gotta get up and do the thing that I'm obsessed about, which happens to be, you can say like, oh, he really is into. Well, let me put it this way: whatever it is that you're into that distracts you from God, if it's so, and obviously, I'm talking in a spiritual sense. With alcohol, it doesn't even have to distract you from God. It, in and of itself, is an evil that is upon you that you need to free yourself from, or beseech the Lord that He might free you. In and of itself, it's something you want to be free from. Whereas there are other things in a spiritual sense, which in and of themselves, just like alcohol, is a matter of conscience. It's not necessarily bad for you. Obviously, what they're describing here in verse 11 is bad for you under all circumstances. But what I'm saying is there are some, just as there is a small amount of alcohol could be construed to be a moderate use for some people. Yeah, I'm going to leave the door open for some people, or for anyone, to judge for themselves and their conscience. But each person needs to look to themselves and look at their own sin, and work with God to address sin issues in their life and to learn how they might overcome them. It's part of your walk with God. It's like you have the Lord Jesus as your helper in all your times of trouble. And so, if you have sins that are not right, you can turn to the Lord and look for help. I don't know how many times that, all the sins I ever overcame praying about them. There are things I'm still praying about that I haven't overcome, right? And so I told my son when he was wrestling, look, I told him, look, I can't guarantee that by praying you're going to win every match. But I do guarantee that you won't win without praying. You know what I mean? And actually we were talking about going to state there. Like you need prayer or you're not even going to get off the ground. If you want to overcome alcohol, you got to pray. It may not immediately give you the results you want, but I guarantee if you don't pray, you won't get the results you want either. The results you should want. And the harp and the viol and the tabret and pipe and wine are in their feasts, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of His hands. It's weird. I feel like I'm not in the Bible study when I can't hear myself. So, they throw these all day, all night parties, drinking and playing music and having fun. The harp and the viol and the tabret and the pipe and wine. They've got the best kind of feast. They got music and the booze. And that's how you make a party. That's how you make a feast. Jesus served the wine. As I said, if I went to a wedding, I'd have a glass of wine. I probably shouldn't have several glasses of wine, But the point is, it can be done. The prohibition is not against wine in the Bible. It's against strong drink. And wine has it. Not against drunkenness. Wine and strong drink do have alcohol, and they can make you drunk. But they're not forbidden in and of themselves. So, because it was honestly one of the thing about wine and beer in the ancient world was it was a clean source of water. It was healthy. Healthier. oddly healthier than maybe much of the water they would have to drink. Therefore, they have all these, they take a lot of time for their feasts. They are serious about partying. But when it comes to the Lord, they're not serious about the Lord. His work is not, they don't regard it. So I'm saying, like, what is the work God is doing in my life? I want to be aware of this, and I want to be part of it. I want to participate. That's how we have to be. We want to be part of the work that God is doing. Because we are his workmanship. And there should be things happening. If things aren't happening, I'm like, God, why aren't you working on me anymore? I need work. I need work over here. This needs some attention. And that's the thing, is like, well, if you don't pray to him, he probably thinks, and not that he thinks, but it's like it's like I said, when my kids don't ask me for things, I think, well, they're not interested. Maybe you are interested, but I want you to show you're interested. You ask. Jesus was very clear. Ask and it shall be given you. He didn't say, hang around, wait, maybe I'll show up. God is operating. Man is being foolish. That's what we see here. Man is being a fool. He's got his music. He's got his wine. And they're eating up. And they're having feasts morning and night. And what God is up to is far from their minds. And this is, the Lord has made it possible by being so distant from our senses. You know what I mean? Like, in some ways, though, we would say, well, the evidence for God is overwhelming. But then we're just really saying the wonder of the universe is exceeding. You know what I mean? Meaning there's so much that, like, we're wondering at the universe and then supplying God as the object that created the wonder. And so, but for a lot of people, they look at the universe and the wonder and they say, yeah, it's a big, isn't an amazing accident. Different points of view. But the point is, we can ignore God's work. Well, what I'm saying is, because it is apparently, I'll tell you what, though you can look out at the world and you can behold the marvel of God's handiwork, it is not necessarily so that everyone who sees the world has that impression, because it's not just an impression, it's an interpretation of what you're looking at. You know what I mean? They interpret it differently. They don't regard the work of God's hands. And the funny thing is, though we may believe in God, we can be just as just unconcerned with God's works as Christians, as the heathen are. We can be so caught up in our worldly pursuits, we can be so caught up in our jobs and our hobbies and other things that we just have no connection to God and his work in us. Or very little. Or it becomes so infrequent that it's like you start thinking, if you were paying attention, you'd maybe think like, yeah, I'm drifting away from the Lord. You don't want to drift away from the Lord. I mean, it happens. Sometimes there are times when I've been praying for something big, like to be delivered from something or have something turn out properly, praying. And then it happens, and afterwards I'm just not as prayerful. And that's a normal thing, I think, that you pray, you get what you want, and then you're not immediately like, oh, thanks, with the same degree of intensity that you were, please give it to me. And that's unfortunate, but the Lord understands our frame. I've been thankful to him over the years for everything numerous times, even when it was not right at the moment. And we want to maintain a thankful heart, because the works of God are for us. All things working together for good for those that love God. That means us, and that also means all things. And so God's working even when we're not paying attention. God's working even when it seems like the work doesn't make sense, according to what we think maybe God should want. Why is God doing this? Because I thought he wanted this for me, So why is he making it harder by putting this obstacle in my way? This is what I thought God wanted. So, it's hard to tell exactly why things are going, and God may want that, but he may want you to do it the hard way. Things like that happen. It's not for us entirely to know, but to explore and find out and to know after. I mean, I don't always know ahead of time. Sometimes I go through a situation and then I find out. I find out what God's will was. A lot of times that's what life is. It's like I'm discovering my destiny. If I knew it ahead of time, I wouldn't have to do anything. But I could just show up at the end. But I don't know, so I have to experience everything as it happens. So therefore, my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge. And their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Of course, it's all spoken of Israel, but as you know, this is very easy to put in a more general sense, and we're going to do that because we're Christians living 2,600 years later, and the events of his time are going to be marginally important to us. Certainly, they will be important in understanding what he's talking about. That's the thing, is you got to understand the historical context. We've talked about it, right? The Assyrians are going to invade the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, taking virtually the entire population of the northern kingdom they're taking away the kingdom. They're depopulating the area significantly and taking away into captivity many of the principal people. And when they do this, well, the thing is, the people, the prophets are saying this, but the country doesn't believe it. We don't believe it. I'm glad God isn't telling me to prophesy anything about China taking over our country and leading us into captivity. I'm glad that's not like coming strongly on me. That would be sad. I understand how the prophets felt. They were very sad people. This is my pic. This is the picture I chose of Isaiah. Isaiah, sawn in sunder. This happens when you say things people don't want to hear. And there's not a good, strong legal structure to protect you. This is what freedom of speech gets you in the ancient world. And notice we have some little poetic flourishes here when it says, "My people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge." If they really understood what he's saying is that this could be prevented. If they had the knowledge of God, which I could provide them, if they would be in communion with me and we would have peace together, they would not go into captivity. And their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Now that, obviously, when you have a siege, you can have hunger and thirst, and he could be alluding to that. But of course, I really think he's got much more of a spiritual mindset here. Though they are going to captivity, and they will not probably be well treated on that journey and be thirsty and hungry, it is also a picture of a spiritual state. There is a spiritual captivity. And the idea of captivity, when I see captivity and going to captivity, I know, you got to understand, this is one of the most important prophetic themes, is the captivity. Israel being taken into captivity by the Assyrians, then the Babylonians. And technically, they'd been into captivity by the Egyptians. They were frequently taken captive. Now, there is in the book of Revelation, it says, he that leads, in the book, chapter 13, between the two beasts, between the beast that comes up out of the sea and the beast that comes out of the earth, the one with 7 heads and 10 horns, and the one with two horns like a lamb and speaks as a dragon. Between there's this little passage that says, if any man have an ear, let him hear. It's kind of a little snuggled in the middle of that chapter. He that leadeth into captivity must go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here's the patience and faith of the saints. Captivity is something that is an idea of being captured, obviously, and taken prisoner. And of course, there is a deeper spiritual component to the idea of captivity. If you look in the New Testament, if you look up the word like just captive, I'm just going to do it just without any, I hadn't, ahead of time hadn't planned on doing this, but let's just show, hold on a second here. Okay, let's just see what happens if we go here. I'm just going to bring up a search window and let's just look up captive. I mean, I'm thinking of verses, but I just want to show you how much this comes up. I'm just supposed to leave the E off. See, that's a little trick. That'll give me captivity. And it may end up being too much. I just want, excuse me, I got hiccups. Common ranges, New Testament. I just want how much it comes up. All right, 8, but it's an important theme. Look at when it says here, Luke, he's quoting from Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and the recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty them that are bruised. Well, there's that. And he also talks about, and here in Israel, again, this is talking about the Jews in chapter 21 of Luke being led into captivity by the Romans. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles till the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now here Paul talks about another kind of captivity. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bring me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. 2 Corinthians 10:15, casting down imaginations and every high thing, and the exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. That's a different take on it. But here, Ephesians 8, wherefore he said, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. There's this idea of taking captives and freeing captives, and that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil, who are taken captive by him at his will. For these are the sort which creep into houses and lead captive silly women, laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts. See, again, there's another captivity. Led captive by these who creep into houses. This is religious leaders. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword. That's Revelation 20. So you see the differences of the way captivity is used. And it's not always translated captivity. And of course, captivity is really just another word for slavery. It just refers to the action. What captivity differs only from slavery in the work component. A captive differs only from a slave in that he has not been put to work per se. A slave is a captive, though a captive is not necessarily a slave. See, other verses that come to my mind are verses like in the Gospel of John. What chapter is it? Well, let me just give you the what it says, and then we can look at it if we need to. Let me have a look off here. Well, it's the one where it says, like, it's, I think it's chapter 8. Whosoever commits sin is the servant of sin. And the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth forever. If the Son, therefore, shall set you free, the opposite of captivity is freedom. So I say, there's a certain amount of bondage, slavery, captivity. They're all in one category. We have freedom and liberty and self-determination. I had to come up with 3. Right? Once you list 3 over here, you got to list 3 over here. Those, 3 things. You got those on the other hand, and they're opposed to each other. Freedom and captivity. And captivity can take many forms. That says they take captive silly. You can be taken captive forcibly, and it always there is a sort of a subtext, at least, of force. And that's why people will talk about people being held captive by things like drugs and alcohol, because there is a sense in which it is against their will. There are other things that can take. People can be held captive by pornography and captivated by it. Where they just keep going back and looking and looking and looking, and they are addicted to pornography. And that can be also just as debilitating, man. And people spend their whole days just sitting in front of a computer and not being productive. It's bad enough to sit in front of a computer. I'd love rather to be working with my hands, at least for my own enjoyment. And working on my computer is working with my hands, but I just mean in more working with my arms and body and on my feet. I do enjoy. But in this captivity, drugs can hold you captive, and the spirit of the world can hold you captive. You can get so caught up in things in the world that you're in a kind of captivity. because you lack knowledge. It's the lack of knowledge that's part of it. Let me go back here. They're gone into captivity because they don't see what these things are doing to their lives, the way they're taking over their lives, the way the Assyrians marching in to take Israelites off to God knows where. As they take them captive, they have no realization that they're being taken captive. And it happens in things like that. Like drugs, a lot of times people don't realize as they're becoming addicted. They don't realize till they try to quit that suddenly like, I'm addicted. I can't quit. Happens with a lot of things. Also, just less obvious things, like more mundane things in life. Hopefully not particularly so. But we can become so absorbed in things when we find we have no time for God. We may be in a kind of a spiritual captivity. It depends on the case. I don't get too specific about that stuff because we can overanalyze our walk with God and get all in the minutia. When we have, look, God is for us. He's working for us. He's working it out. I don't have to know everything. I do lack knowledge. Without knowledge, I'm going to go into captivity. The only place I can get it is from God. The only place I can be fed. The hunger, I was going to say the famine here is for knowledge. As it says in the book of Amos, which precedes Isaiah just a bit. Amos prophesied just before Isaiah. He's one of the early prophets of the prophets we think of as the book writing prophets. Amos wrote, "There will be a famine in the land. The Lord says, behold, I send a famine in the land. Not a famine of bread or a thirst for water, but of hearing the word of God." People not able to hear the word of God. And what it has to do is it means that, but it's that they can hear it. The words are being spoken, but they're not listening. They're not paying attention. And even if they are paying attention, have you ever paid attention to someone who's making an argument you don't agree with, that you don't agree with it the whole time? The whole time you're listening, you're just thinking about what you're going to say in opposition to it. That happens. You ever been so against someone you're not listening? You're not paying attention. You're hearing, but you're not listening. You're not really, like, what they have to say is so unimportant to you that you're not really tuning in, as we say. And so this famine and thirst also has a symbolic spiritual component. And this is common throughout the Bible. Like Jesus said to the devil when he was tempted, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. The reason that honorable men are famished is because they don't listen to the prophets. They don't listen to the word of God. They don't follow the law of God. So they're famished for knowledge. They're weak. They're pathetic. Of course they're going into captivity. They're going into captivity because they are ignorant. They don't know. They don't know the ways of the Lord, or the ways of war, the ways, whatever ways you need to get out of this situation that God could teach you or show you need, you lack. And he's not going to give it to them because the primary thing they needed to have that relationship with God, to be with God, to be close with him, that primary thing is missing. And therefore they're vulnerable. Their ignorance has made them vulnerable. And that's the thing, is like, our ignorance is our biggest enemy. Ignorance and foolishness to lead us into making the wrong decision and putting ourselves in positions where we are not right with God and where we're not doing anyone any good. Especially when you're talking about a larger society and the leadership. This past year, I've never regretted until this year, and then just a bit. I never regretted dropping out of college and skipping out on political science and not becoming a politician. But this year I thought, like, what was I, stupid? I left it to those other kids. Like, when I think about the kids I knew, like when I look at the people in politics and I think about what kids were they in high school, and it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. The people we put in charge are, like, I feel like we need to go in there and get them all out, unfortunately. Like, that's how I feel about it. Like, they're just all... We are headed for disaster. Maybe not now, but it's coming. And then before the end of this century, we will have a disaster. That's not like a crazy prediction. We may already be in the midst of it. The men are famished. The people are thirsty. The idea of hunger and thirst in a spiritual sense, something Jesus addressed a lot. Man shall not eat by bread alone. He divided the loaves and the fishes. There was the woman at the well where she said, he said, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me, and I'd give you to drink living water. And the water that I give you to drink will be a well of water in you, springing up into everlasting life. The idea is that there is a certain water you need that you're thirsty for, that you could have in you that would keep you alive all the time. And this water is a spiritual thing it's something that comes from God and only from God. It's the life and the spirit of life that only comes from God. Meaning, this is not, you can just drink water. This is special. And the Lord himself, it's with him. And he shares it with us, gives us to us. And these are the things we can obtain in Christ. True abundance of life, true abundance of happiness, true abundance of spiritual blessings. And not being thirsty for spiritual things. And the thing is, you may not even know it. Like, they don't even realize how thirsty they are. Because unlike thirst, it's not like unlike thirst, it's not like they can identify the signs. Meaning this, people talk about things like God-shaped holes. Everyone's got a God-shaped hole. I never liked that. I always felt like, I don't know. Because I don't believe that. I don't believe that God is not for everyone. I mean that in both senses. Meaning he is not for everyone, meaning he is not for someone in a positive sense of like, I'm for you. And also, he is not for everyone in the sense of, here's God, take him. He's for you. Meaning it's your possession. He does not belong to everybody, and everybody doesn't belong to him. And so I don't think everyone has a God-shaped hole. I mean, they would benefit from God in their lives, but that God did not make them with this deep ache and need for him. And some people would say all people are like that. I don't know. Is that a verse? If you could show it to me, I'll correct myself. You know what I mean? I don't recall that in the Bible. That's a sentiment we have. It's a bit of sentimental, I'm not very fond of that kind of sentimental thinking. Because we may want God to love and want everyone, it just doesn't make sense with reality. But some people don't realize, and that's what I mean, like they don't have God, and they don't know they need God. They don't know the truly poor state of their spiritual affairs. It comes to mind like Ebenezer Scrooge, like the Christmas Carol. And it's just because I saw a bit of that. What was it? We had we put on the part of some Christmas Carol at some point. What was it? Oh, whatever. And I was thinking about I recently watched a cartoon version of a Christmas. I don't know why. It was really short. I'm trying to remember what it was a part of. Oh, well. Anyways, but like the character, Ebenezer Scrooge, is like a miser, right? And he doesn't have people in his life. And in some ways, he seems like a mean, miserable old man, but he seems content about it. You know what I mean? He doesn't see his own depravity properly. He doesn't really see it. It's not until the spirits come and show him his life and his past and his present and his future that he sees this. And this knowledge gives him a sense of regret and all that. You know what I mean? It's the knowledge that informs and that fills. And then all of a sudden he could see he wanted to live. He was, he could see his hunger. He could see his thirst. I want to live. I want to have relationships with people. I don't want to die alone. He hadn't thought on these things. Age had probably creeped up on him. I mean, it's a story. It's a good story, though. It's a great story, actually. And it shows that aspect of people that are hungry and they don't know it. I think about that. There's I think that's Isaiah 42. Yeah. He had set himself on fire round about, and it burned him. Yet he laid it not to heart. Wait. Yeah, whatever. But the idea is that, like, that's from Isaiah 42 at the last verse. That you can set yourself on fire and get burned and not even know it. And it's like this. It's like that idea of the ignorance. The damaging ignorance. And it doesn't have to be, because God is... I called out all the day to a rebellious people. A people that did not walk in my name. I am sought of them that asked not for me. I am found of them that sought me not. I said all the day long, I said, behold me to a people that were not called by my name. I spread out my hands all the day to a rebellious people. And they have no knowledge. They're thirsty and they're hungry. They don't even realize it. It set him on fire and he didn't know it. He was starving to death. He didn't even realize. Didn't even stop to eat. You know? Desensitized. You see the drunkenness aspect in it? That's another thing. Sometimes when people are alcoholics, they forget to eat. I don't know. When I used to drink, I had a problem eating. Like, I would eat more. So it was a different thing for me. But some people, they don't. Maybe it's, if you eat, it slows down the absorption of the alcohol. Maybe they don't want to have their stomach, anything to interfere with it. And so, drinking an empty stomach all the time. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory and their multitude and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. Hell, I love this verse. Hell hath enlarged herself, opened her mouth to receive all their glory, all their multitude, all their pomp, all their rejoicing. They're going to all descend into it. And hell, Sheol in Hebrew, it refers to the grave. And you won't find any passages in the Old Testament about... The thing is, the concept of hell is really hammered out in the New Testament with much more detail, but also with much more symbolism. And certainly it's just a subject that gets talked about more. But my perspective, of course, is in the Old Testament when they talked about hell, they didn't have the revelations that Jesus made. And so when they talk about it, they're talking about the grave opening up to receive all these people in it, all their deaths. They're going to die. There's going to be a big, because hell refers to the place where people go when they die. And it could be often translated pit, because it refers to the pit. We bury them in a pit in the ground. That's why we have this image of hell as being an underground place. You know what I mean? We think of it as this subterranean, fiery place like the lava caverns of whatever. That's how hell is imagined in the popular imagination. I'm not saying we Christians or we Bible scholars, whatever. I'm saying we human beings. But the idea is that, hell is, under normal circumstances, it's got to be so big because there's a certain trickle of dead people that come in. But, when people are so ignorant and so foolish, hell has to get a lot bigger. Open up my mouth. Ready, here it comes, a big delivery. A big delivery of dead. All their glory, it's a simple thing of like, hey, all the things in life that you put stock in, all the things in life that you thought were so important, it's all going down into the darkness you're going down into. You won't be able to take your glory with you. You're not going to take you're taking it with you into hell, but not into God's kingdom, because hell is not God's kingdom. They try to give, they bury kings with treasure in the ancient world. They wanted them to be able to take their treasures with them. Why do you think they did that? I want to take it with me. Bury me with my boat and my slaves and my money. I want to take them with me to the afterlife. That's why they would bury themselves with stuff, figuring they might need it. Or maybe when they wake up, they'll need weapons for the last battle. They all descend down into hell, and they're going to die. And the mean man shall be brought down, the mighty man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. And when they see all the leadership, all these people drunken, dried up with thirst, there's an idea of drunkenness, a famine. They both speak to, they're both kind of disabilities. Drunkenness impairs your judgment. It impairs your physical abilities. It does all kinds of things. Same thing with you're thirsty and hungry. Hunger and thirst can have the same effects as drunkenness as far as losing critical thinking capacity. If you were actually, especially thirst, man, thirst will kill you. I mean, literally, in a very short order. You can go without eating for a tremendous amount of time. You don't need food. You know what I mean? I mean, as far as like, you won't die. It takes forever to starve to death if you've got water. Not forever, but it takes a while. Yeah, I mean, it's like, you'd be astounded how long you can go without eating. Especially if you're an American, quite frankly. Especially if you're overweight. Because your body will eat up all that fat. Just hopefully when what's left over is healthy enough to walk around. You just have a big bag of skin left over. Dragging that around. I mean, as a Christian, I would be horrified. I don't want to be obese in the last days, or any time. And I have much pity and love for the many brethren who struggle with that sin. There's all kinds of, it's unfortunate. A lot of people are able to hide their sins. When you have obesity, everyone sees. And that's got to be humiliating. When I was overweight, when I was getting up towards 300 pounds, I wasn't exactly humiliated. But sometimes I'd look at myself and say, I've become like kind of a big fat guy. People would still call, no one ever called me fat. They always said big guy. They would say, oh, that fat guy. They would be like, oh, talk to that big guy. Because fortunately, being almost 6'3", I tend not to take the shape of a bowling ball. But even so, we have a lot of capacity to survive. Even me, I'm not exactly scrawny. But, why did I say that? Well, the point I think I was trying to make was just that regardless of your circumstances, these are debilitating, which leaves you vulnerable. Spiritual drunkenness, what was the other one? Famine weakens you, even just like a literal one does. Just like, would you want to face the Assyrians drunk and starving? You imagine you hadn't eaten or drinking anything for 3 days, and someone hands you a bottle of whiskey, and you're going to go to battle. What do you think your prospects are? Mine would be terrible. Terrible. At that point, the whiskey might help. It's just God only knows. I'm gonna need a lot of luck from the Lord on this one. And the mean man shall be brought down, the mighty man shall be humbled, the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. Yeah. The mean man, mean being like the man of small means, the small man. That's what mean means. It means small. It can mean like a small person. He's a mean man means he's small. And that can be meaning he's not a very powerful, he doesn't have a great job. But it can also imply that he is of low character. But here it doesn't have that low character. And we also get it confused with the idea of being mean, like the the cruelty. But that's not what this implies. Well, it may come, I don't know if it's derived from that. It may be, or it just might be a homonym that sounds the same and is spelled the same, but has a different meaning. Or they may be, the one may be constructed from the other. I don't know. I'm not going to give a English language lecture here. I don't know. I'm not that, not that knowledgeable even about English. But the mean man means like your average guy, the regular person, not the mighty. It's the opposite of mighty. That's why it gives mighty next. The mighty man should be humbled. In the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. It falls on great and small. That's one of the things the Bible always makes clear. God is no respecter of persons, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond. They all can receive the gospel. They all can receive God's wrath. And they all will receive God's wrath if they deserve it. And so, a mean man is a man of just low estate. A mighty man is a man of higher estate. The lofty, they're all going to be humbled. And I think mean here is correct. Let me just double check that. Once again, I've gone off on the meaning of a word without actually checking it. And what verse were we on? Mean man, okay. Oh, okay. See, like mean man, you won't be able to see this, but when I hover here, when this highlights, I have a little pop-up window. So if you're on Bible Hub and you're on Isaiah 5 and you're on the King James Version plus Strong's, which is, you know what? Instead of being trying to do this on a tiny little half of the screen, let's just bring it up full screen. So like if you look at this, and there's just I've mentioned this before, but just the mean man highlighted, well, I see a quick definition. It's Hebrew, it's in Strong's Concordance, number 120, Adam. Yes, that's the same as Adam. It means man or mankind. Now, I was right about the English word mean. Adam does mean man in his, just all men are Adam, human. It's in the lowest sense, the lowest common denominator. Like a woman is Adam, as far as a human. The word Adam is used in the sense of a human sense. Or let's say it can be. You know what I mean? It can refer to mankind. Okay, and then Ish, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. The mighty man is actually Ish. There's another word for man in Hebrew. It refers to a man, but in a higher sense. Like we would if we were saying, like we don't have we could say, be a man. Come on, be a man. And what that means to different people is different things, like, because it depends on what you think it is to be a man. But it's saying, don't be just a human or just a person, but there's a higher state to which you should aspire. Be a man. You know what I mean? Don't be a child. Don't be a boy. Be a man. And so, or don't be a woman. Be a man. Right? And when I say it like that, it's funny because you know what I mean. If I say, if I tell someone, stop being a woman and start being a man, everyone gets it. It's funny. You should get it if you have any experience with the English language. I'm telling someone to stop being such a sniveling, cowardly, frightened creature and be a courageous, strong warrior, a man. You know? Stop being a helpless thing that needs protection and can't think for itself, or like a child. Well, I said woman, but you can use that comparison. If you tell a guy stop being a woman, start being a man, it's an insult because you're calling him to something more than just what men and women are. You're calling him to be something higher and above what we are all commonly. Because men and women, we're the same. We're the same creature. We're exactly the same. But we're totally different, right? We have so much in common. So, I mean, obviously, between human beings, the things that are the same between us, between the races, between the sexes, between the opinions, we have much more in common than we have that is different. But we emphasize the differences because the differences make all the difference. I mean, that's how we can, if we didn't have differences, we wouldn't be able to differentiate between one individual and another. So there are differences. So Adam, man will be brought down. And it means man in that sense of mankind. And mighty man is man more in the sense of man as mighty. He shall be humbled. And lofty, I wonder about that. It's Gaboa, which sounds a lot like Geber to me. But it means high, exalted ones. Those that exalt themselves. Those who are exalted will be brought down. That's always a theme of God's day also. When the Lord comes, the exalted will be brought low. The low will be made high. The humble will be exalted, and the exalted will be made low. Every mountain and island will be removed out of its place. The valleys should be exalted. The hills should be made low, etc., etc., etc. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. And when the day of the Lord comes, and he brings about these changes to make the world according to his pattern. Yes, God himself, the Lord of hosts, will be exalted specifically in his judgment, in doing judgment, because judgment is good. Like I said, Jesus may have warned us about judgment, but what he was saying is the judgment you judge other people with, you will be judged with. But he also said in another place, judge righteous judgment. And there are many calls for us to judge. If you read the New Testament, it's impossible to escape if you're critically thinking. You know you have to judge on some level. It doesn't mean you judge to condemn people to hell, or you judge people in a way that, discourages them from seeking God. I mean, there are ways you can judge that are very harmful to you, and it can be harmful to other people too. So you don't want to engage in that lest you find yourself in trouble with God. But, there is amount of judging we must do. We must judge, like Paul said, of whom is Hymenaeus and Philetus, who I've judged all, or what did he say? There was an example of someone who had committed fornication in the church, and he says, I've judged the matter already without even seeing it. Meaning he felt so confident in his judgment, he was able to judge it from far away about what should happen to that person. And that's the thing. It's like, let's say you have a brother and you forgive him, but let's say he's committed some sin that requires some kind of recompense. You have to judge what to do about that. How do you make him pay? Sometimes there has to be consequences for people's actions, and judgment has to be used. Whether someone is guilty, whether to turn someone over to the police, whether to whatever. We have to exercise judgment. It's decision making. It's critical. Now, when you're making decisions and critically judging people, you better be careful, because however you judge people, you will also be judged. If you're harsh in your judgment, you better be ready for a harsh judgment. There are times when I've felt like I had to judge people harshly, and I have to think about that. I'm like, am I ready to face the same level of judgment? I'm like, I think I'm going to have to. But I can't avoid it, because it is something I feel strong about. For example, let's say I say wine is a mocker. You shouldn't even drink a drop of alcohol. It's the worst thing in the world. Right? Let's say I say that. Well, if then I go around accusing people who drink of doing wrong, I'm obviously a hypocrite, and I'm going to be judged under the same standard. Now, if I say, well, it's okay to use a small amount, in moderation, and then I go out and I see someone using a small amount of, but I start thinking like, oh, they're drunk, and I start judging them. Well, that can fall into the same condemnation of false judgment. I don't want to subject people to false judgment lest I be subjected to it. Oh, all right. We're out of time. Let's see. Let's read verse 17. We can't stop there. Then shall the lambs feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. So, the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment. The God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. He's going to be made holy in his righteousness. His doing right is going to, in the eyes of all the people, filled with his knowledge. The lambs, the people who also, lambs. Here's an interesting thing. God is looking at the same people in two different ways. The same problem, two different ways. Because a lamb, like a drunkard, lacks self-determination, good judgment, and a lot of other things that we could equate with drunkenness. In fact, one of the things, people, they'll criticize the general population. They'll say, oh, everyone's all sheeple. They compare people to sheeple. I always hated the word sheeple. Please never use it around me. I just hate it. It's so disrespectful, and it's so self-congratulatory. Like, everyone else is sheeple, man. I just don't like when people talk about average people as sheeple, because I know a lot of average people, and it bespeaks a certain arrogance and self-congratulation that I just always feel a little bit nauseated by. So please, in my presence, never use the word sheeple or refer to the multitude as sheeple. I hate it. I really do. I don't know why it's a pet peeve. It's just something I don't like. I hate that word, sheeple. And I think they're so clever. I don't know. It's just me. Don't take it the wrong way if you use that word. I don't like it, obviously. Because sometimes I feel like people just use words and like they say things, and it's like they just want to say big things and use big words and they want to make a stink. They want to draw attention to themselves. Like, actually communicating is not really the goal. The goal is to insult people by calling them sheeple, and the goal is to make show off how smart they are. You ever run into people like this where it's like, it's not, the goal is not education or help or anything. It's just the goal is, look how smart I am. Look at all the clever things I know. Aren't you impressed? And I guess as someone for whom a lot of knowledge came naturally, I'm not impressed. Because I think knowledge is over. There's different kinds of knowledge. And not all knowledge is equal. And not all knowledge is equally valuable. The lambs will feed after their manner. Oh, I'm not actually supposed to be somewhere else. Dubler fold. Manner means fold. They will feed in their flocks. And then shall the lambs feed after the manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. Now, I always saw that as the places that the fat ones ate, meaning, I thought of this passage in times past as being that God would take the fat ones, which would be like the leaders, the people who led Israel astray, and they're all gone. And the lambs, the helpless ones, they are being fed. God has come and taken care of the helpless ones, but the ones that were getting fat, meaning, there's another place in Ezekiel where it implies that the fat cattle, he talks about fat cattle and lean cattle in Ezekiel. And that's what kind of informed my understanding here, because I had in mind that fat cattle and lean cattle analogy, whereby we have, the fat cattle represents the fat cats, and the people are fattening themselves off of society, while the lean cattle are the people who are struggling to barely get by. And he talks about fat cattle and lean cattle. And so here, I think in terms of fat cattle and lean cattle, the fat ones to me are the privileged and the profitable, the rich, and the powerful. And they are the ones whose waste places are being eaten by strangers, meaning what was left over from the fat ones is given to others. I mean, we're going to eliminate and this almost makes me think of the church here. God taking Israel, purging from her the wicked ones in her midst, the children that have gone astray, the sons of Belial, whatever you want to call them, the Hebrews that have forsaken their God and are not worthy of their covenant. Part of the natural branches, as Paul said, were cut out, and we are grafted in. And that makes me think of, as Christians and strangers, we are in the family of God as strangers, partaking of the table that was prepared for his people. So that does make me think also of the Lord Jesus Christ feeding and bringing in the Gentiles. And so the waste places being the idea that they, when we talked about the fat cattle and the lean cattle, the fat cattle, when they would go through, they would eat up the grass and then shred everything down, and no one else could eat after them. Meaning they would kind of ruin the ground. And that's also the idea with the rich people in society. It's like a lot of rich people in society are jerks. I almost used a bigger, badder word. But they climb the ladder of success, and then they turn around and they pull the ladder up after them. They don't want anyone else to get there. Just like all these jerk-off comedians these days. All these jerk-off comedians are making jokes, or they made their career being offensive, offending people. And now they're defending people who want to cancel people for being offensive and offending Christians and other people. And they got to the top of the ladder, made their millions off of just at our expense, basically. And then they pull the ladder up after them so that no one who makes offensive jokes now against their pet groups that they want protected, no one who makes jokes about them is ever going to be successful, because they're going to make sure they get canceled, they get hounded out of a career. No one will hire them. We'll see. Wicked. All right, but the Lord of hosts shall be exalted. The waste places shall fret. And I thought there was another way to look at that passage about the waste places. I thought maybe it's like when they get full, like meaning I'm fat. It's like when they get full, like meaning I'm fat, I'm full. And what the waste places would represent is like the leftover. Because there's also a concept of the leftovers in the Bible, of the gleanings, the leavings. There's always like the leftovers, the remnant. And so in harvesting, there's always a remnant. You never get everything. You never get every tomato out of the tomato patch. You never get grape off of the grapevine. There's always little gleaning grapes. There's always little bits of leftover food. And in the law, they actually said you weren't supposed to go through and pick you would just pick, and you don't go back through a second time and get all the extras. You leave that for the poor people to come through and pick. Right? You leave the gleanings. And I thought maybe that's what it refers to, is that the lambs feed until they're full, and there's even leftovers for the Gentiles, for the strangers. That could be an interpretation. I still like the fat cattle, lean cow interpretation, where they are basically wasting and destroying in a negative sense, as opposed to the sense of like, oh, they've gone through, and it's a waste place, meaning they've covered it, but there would always be expected and implied a little bit there to feed off of. But I don't think God's elect of the Gentiles are going to have to make do with scraps. Though, that could be, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That could be what this is referring to. It could either be talking about like a scrap situation or a replacement situation, meaning the strangers are replacing the fat ones, which makes a lot of New Testament sense. In the Old Testament here, it's a bit, maybe asking a bit much from Isaiah. So I don't know. But anyways, it's not that critical we understand fully. So we thank the Lord for giving us understanding that we do have, because it is so critical to our understanding and preventing us from starving to death and drying up with thirst in a spiritual sense, because we don't understand what's going on. We don't have the proper nourishment in order to live our lives as Christians in this world and to please God and spread the gospel as we've been called to do. So thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to being back again tomorrow to continue in Isaiah, starting at verse 18. Oops. It's funny. Oh, that's right. That's weird. I'm going to double. Oh, that's because of that. I'm not actually switching. If I was here. Oh, you learn a new thing every day. And why isn't that? Oh, here we go. Transition. All right, there we go. And music. And mute the mic.
Continue until night, till wine inflame them, and the harp and the viol, the tabret and pipe, and wine